2022, excuse me. So just a few housekeeping rules before we start. I don't know, Maya, if you can put back the slides with housekeeping rules. We will record this session, and we will keep the microphones and the videos off, but the chat will be available for you to communicate in case of other technical problems, or we will share some links through it. For any comments and definitely the questions about this session, please use Slido, and you can use this QR and the hashtag EUTech. So today we have a great lineup of speakers that have come in to explain why this activity is important for the European Commission, for us as an agency, the European Innovation Council, and of course for the world of innovation. So I think we can just get going. Without further ado, thank you very much, Irina, for being with us. I give the floor to Irina Reyes, member of the Cabinet of Commissioner Maria Gabriel, who is Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Education, Culture and Youth. So thank you very much. The floor is yours, Irina.
Thank you, Elena. I hope you can all hear me. I cannot see all of you, but I will speak to the camera and try to connect with you. So I'm very happy to be here today and also to extend Commissioner Gabriel's support, not just for this index, but for all the work the EIC and its community is doing to increase the diversity in Europe. And I will just mention very short figures. I know that we will speak about it a lot today. But just to set the scene, and this is about the startups in particular. So latest data, but indeed there is scarce data. But some of the few reports that we have show that 3/4 of startups here in Europe are founded by men. And we have approximately 8% only women-led companies. I mean, when hearing these statistics, it looks gloomy, but I'm convinced that there are many out there who maybe also are not covered always by statistics and surveys. But it is a fact that, for example, looking at the venture capital raised, again, women-led companies manage to get less than 2% of the available venture capital out there. And we know that right now in Europe, there is a lot. I want to really stress that I'm convinced that we are already doing a lot to support gender equality. Personally, I've seen a great change also when our new president, von der Leyen, took office. And I also see it with Commissioner Gabriel. I think it's consistently since the start of her career, she has supported and pushed for this. This is a priority for her. But I know also that the teams, the DGs are doing a lot. And I just want to give you 3 examples, which I think are also useful for this discussion. Horizon Europe, I'm sure you know it, the biggest innovation program. And we say that gender equality is mainstream through the program. What does it mean? Well, first it means that when evaluators evaluate proposals, they have to look at the inclusiveness and gender equality of the proposal, not just the team that has put forward the proposal, but actually who this research is benefiting, who are the users in it, how is it done. We also ask all public bodies, universities, research organizations to have a gender equality plan in place before applying for funding. Otherwise, they are not eligible. And this plan is not only a tick the box, I have a paper, I have a plan. No, it has to be put forward by the management, and it has to be implementable and also reported on a regular basis. And I'm glad to say that today, I think when I check the statistics, we have over 579 organizations already having this plan in place. We also have a gender parity in our advisory boards, which in the case of the European Innovation Council Board, it's confident to say that it's both gender balanced, but also geographical. And when we recruit evaluators to look at our proposals, regardless of what field there is, we ask to have as much balance as possible. And looking at the AIC, and I'm sure Jean-David will also talk a little bit more about the efforts doing there, we've seen that in 2 years, if we make a lot of effort to come out from our comfort zone, from our usual networks, we can reach also women-led startups. And I think now we are around 29% of those who are funded are also women-led. And I know that we have a target that maybe some will say is too ambitious, but the target is set, it's 40%. We have, of course, also now the Women Tech EU call, which is a new call for women-led, really in the beginning, startups companies. And the ambition is now to support at least 100 women per year. I also want to touch about the European Women Venture Capital Group. And I think Kinga is also here with us. She's a member of the EIC board. She's many things, but she's also leading this group that Commissioner Gabriel uses also to have advice, to have recommendations. And they are super fast. Just 1 year, I think they've produced already 2 reports, one very concrete, not only with data, but with suggestions, both on how we can increase the funding to venture capital going for women, also how to increase decision making, but also more specifically, and that's why we are here today, for data, that we need data. And this is, I think, what now we will discuss how to do that. Is it through an index? Is it through a scoreboard? What to cover? And I just have, I think, 3 pleas for the audience. I really want to ask you to look at diversity beyond men and women, gender. Again, I mentioned when the new commission was set up, I think within 6 months, we have put forward an anti-racism action plan, an LGBTIQ equality strategy, a new strategy on persons with disabilities. And what I want to say with this is that this is a priority, and I think this is our also next avenue. So I would really hope that this index will be as wide as possible. I also hope that when we are working on this index, we already take account other best practices, other indexes out there, because there are many, and not specifically on that, but it's practice that is quite established. And the last message is please also involve the people that we supposedly want to measure. I think they should be there from the start. And once again, thank you very much. And also thanks for the EIC and the team behind this workshop. I look forward hearing now from others.
Many thanks, Irina, for this support and these inspiring words. So now I'm going to give the floor to Jean-David Malo, Director of the European Innovation and SMEs Executive Agency, EISMEA, and also Director of the European Innovation Council. Over to you, Jean-David.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, first of all, for this remarkable and inspiring introduction, Irina. Always a pleasure to listen to you and to what you just said. And many thanks also to those who have prepared this important workshop and who are assisting, in fact, to it. As Irina mentioned it, we in the European Innovation Council, we strongly believe that overlooking diversity, overlooking women entrepreneurs means nothing else than losing out on excellent innovation. And as it was recalled by the EIC, it's true, by Irina, the EIC is indeed the most ambitious innovation initiative ever funded in Europe, with a budget of more than 10 billion euro in the period 2021-2027. But it's much more than a funding program. It's much more than a funding program because it is a program which has the ambitious objective to strengthen the innovation community and to raise the bar in terms of European innovation excellence. And in this context, it's obvious that there is a need to support, in particular, women innovator as being at the heart of the EIC. And of course, equal opportunities are a matter of social justice. They are enshrined in the laws that we should all be treated equally, regardless our gender, our color, our ability, just to name a few reasons. All of this is part of our DNA of what is the European Union. But on top of this, and this is something that gradually is coming up, is recognized. On top of this, there is another very important argument to support diversity and inclusion. And let's be very pragmatic. It's a business case that exists for diversity. This business case for diversity is very strong. It has been consistently demonstrated that diverse teams, in fact, perform better. You have numerous studies that are demonstrating, in fact, that diverse companies financially outperform the others, that they are delivering more impact. But despite all of this, things are moving very slowly, and it's very important, therefore, to take a number of actions. I mean, some of the statistics that Irina has just recalled us are very speaking by themselves, in fact, and it's very important to take this kind of action. And in the EIC, we do not intend to accept the situation as it is. We want to be proactive. And here, allow me to quote Alec Ross, who said recently that we believe that talent is equally distributed among the population, but opportunities, bizarrely, are not. And the stakes that we are facing are too high to overlook this issue. So this is why in the EIC, we have decided to take actions. Allow me to quote a number of them. I will, of course, repeat some already mentioned by Irina, but I will add a number of others. First of all, and it was mentioned by Irina, we ensure that as far as the governance of the European Innovation Council is concerned, we have a 50-50 composition in terms of men and women. And this is also not only in terms of number, but also regarding their origin and the sectors that they are covering, and therefore the knowledge that they are bringing to the board, and therefore benefiting to the European Commission and ultimately to our beneficiaries. We did the same also for the jury of our expert evaluator in the context of the EIC accelerator. I mean, this is something that is also absolutely crucial at the level of the evaluation of proposal, to ensure that there also we have this diversity of composition. Second, we have designed, thanks also to our board, a number of key performance indicators and a number of specific actions in order to increase the number of women-led companies in our portfolio, with a very ambitious target of 35%. It's a very ambitious target when you compare this with reality in the market today, and if you compare in particular also with the funds that are raised by VC-led companies. We had tested, in fact, this approach already in the context of our pilot in 2019-2020 with a very good and very promising result. We have supported in 2020 and in 2021 around 20% of our beneficiaries that are led by women in the context of the EIC accelerator. But we want to continue to progress on this and to achieve this objective of 35%. We know that it will be a difficult journey, but we do believe that this is by increasing the number of success stories, of role models, that we will create the condition and the change also in in the mentality and the behavior of a number of actors, including at the level of investors. And allow me to use this short introduction to thank in particular Kinga, of course, as it was mentioned by Irina, but also Bindi Karia, who is with us today and who chaired, in fact, the working group of the pilot board that delivered a number of specific topics. To achieve the proposed targets, I mean, we have implemented a number of measures to support women innovators. One of them, and certainly the most visible one, was mentioned by Irina. It's the Women Tech EU program. We have already funded a first cohort of 50 women-led startups, but we have the ambition already in 2022 to increase this amount, to more than double this amount by reaching around 120, 130. And in the same time, we launch other actions in order to increase, for example, the number of prizes for rising innovators as part of the Women Innovator Prize. So a number of actions that we have taken in the past and that we continue to take and to propose in order to tackle this very important issue. And this is in this context that we came also to the conclusion that it was absolutely necessary to have a gender and diversity index to monitor what we are doing, to see and to anticipate the evolution, and therefore to take any additional appropriate actions in order to achieve our objective in terms of gender and diversity. And we are in this context very interested in the information that the index will give us, but not only to us, also to other investors, because we believe that diversity will give a competitive advantage to these companies that embrace it as a value. And in the EIC, as you know, we look for disruptive innovation, for game-changing innovation, which usually arise from thinking our future in a radically different way. And in this context, I mean, the difference certainly will come even more with more impact from diverse teams that are composing a number of companies. So we want to see more of this kind of company in the future through our actions. New ones that we will announce also in the context of the work program 2023, on which we are working, but also from any ideas that could pop up from the community. So the call on this European Innovation Gender and Diversity Index is open. You will know more in a bit later today. Please apply to help us to deliver better information to society. I'm sure that the today meeting will be another occasion for a fruitful discussion and to receive at the end of this call opening excellent application by the beginning of September. Thanks a lot, and have a very fruitful meeting today.
Thanks a lot, Jean-David. I now give the floor to Bindi Karia, former member of the EIC Advisory Board. Over to you, Bindi.
Thank you, Elena.
And we should be sharing the slides for you. There they are.
Wonderful. So can you start with the first slide, please? The next one. Great. The next slide, please. Perfect. So it's really nice to see lots of wonderful, familiar faces. And thank you very much, Jean-David, Keith, and the EIC team for asking me to speak today. I've been a former member of the EIC board. I joined in the first version in 2018, and then was on the pilot EIC board until the end of 2021. And I can definitely say that we were a gender balanced board, and we were very, very, very vocal with Jean-David and the whole EIC team and the commissioner. And I can see Jean-David nodding in rapid agreement, because we were always on his case about, we've got to really focus on D&I. What you can see here is a picture of the pilot EIC advisory board, and in yellow is the Gender and Diversity Working Group. Myself and Yusuf, based in Amsterdam, were co-chairs of that diversity working group, and we released a statement almost a year ago where we really provided recommendations. So I think let's just sort of talk about why we ended up setting up this working group. We quickly realized we're missing baseline data on not only women-led EIC companies, but just the whole diversity, et cetera, et cetera. The gender of the CEO of the applicant companies to the EIC accelerator was only monitored for the first time in 2020. And that's when we realized only 8% of successful applicants back then were women. This was before the whole pandemic started to take effect. We actually took action, and I know the EIC team interviewed about 40% of the women-led companies that passed the thresholds. And actually, by the end of the year, that number increased to 29% of women CEOs. That jump was impressive, and we were very happy. However, it's not representative of the many excellent women-led innovative companies that we have there. The problem with the EIC evaluation, I gather, is not this percentage of EIC evaluation success. The perception of companies is actually higher than the percentage of women-led companies applying in the first place. So we are trying to understand if the EIC process is not biased against women founders. I think the problem is more structural and more fundamental. And I know Amy will probably go into this with the numbers following when I speak. And 1/4 of European tech startups have mixed or all women teams, and they were only getting around 10% of the capital invested in Europe. 86% of the deals in 2021 across Europe were raised by all male founding teams. Can we go to the next slide, please? So if you look at the working group and what our objective was to provide recommendations for concrete actions to be implemented by the EIC, including the EIC work program in 2022. Now, the scope was fairly narrow because we needed to start with a baseline, and that was really focusing on gender policy actions for now. However, we have really pushed that wider diversity, ethnicity, physical ability, neurodiversity, age, sexual orientation also needs to be addressed. And myself as a woman of color feel very, very, very passionate about this. Furthermore, we had to look at the entire innovation ecosystem. So from the researchers at university level to the entrepreneurs and the investors. And one of the interesting findings that, not even interesting, we realized that the structure was actually across from LP to venture capital through to the founders. And there are lots of different issues that happen at each level. From a VC perspective, I work as a venture partner at Molten Ventures. We're a large European investor. And how we look at rounds, we look at big Series A and Series B rounds. And I think what I would say there is actually we look at very, very metrics-based. And what we are seeing is not as many female founders are coming through because the metrics that we might invest against are not necessarily met. So actually what needs to be done to really help the next generation of female founders achieve this level of metrics, achieve what we need to do. And actually that is where someone like the EIC can really, really, really step in and be supportive of this ecosystem. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned, the 8 to 29% we talked about earlier, but we want to really interview a lot of the women-led projects who met that criteria. So some other data on women representation in EIC programs. And again, this is slightly old, but I know Jean-David and Keith will keep updated. But a lot of the EIC Pathfinder coordinators, 20% are women. 48% of the evaluators are women. The EIC Accelerator CEOs, as we said, 29% are women. And I'm actually very curious to see what the numbers are in the next couple of years, because anecdotally, I've actually heard that number is dropping, just anecdotally amongst the VC community that we're seeing as we start to track this more. The 50% of the EIC Accelerator jury members are females, and the business acceleration coaches are about 42%. I know we also pushed very hard with Keith and Jean-David to really make sure that the program managers were very gender balanced as well. And my understanding is we're definitely moving in that direction as well. Next slide, please. So these were the recommendations that we came up with in June 2021. Number one, target an equal share of women leading research work packages in the Pathfinder projects. Number two, we wanted to broaden the definition of women-led. Was it just the CEO, or actually could we look at the executive team as well, such as the CTO, CSO, COO? And actually, we even talked about women as board members. That's certainly the role that I play with a lot of the work I do. I sit on startups as board members, working with EIC as board members, et cetera, et cetera. So really think about, what is this definition about? We need to look at the system-wide transformative change. So the EIF, the EIB, and other fund of funds to back more women-led ventures. I know certainly with the work I'm doing, I am seeing many, many, many more female-founded funds launching, but they continue to struggle to receive LP funding. Because again, the way the LPs look at how they invest in venture capital has been really quite narrow and focused, and we've really got to think about how do we address the gender and diversity around that. VCs, as not just female VC partners, but VCs in general, and those that make the recommendations, and the investment decisions, we've really got to think about how we put a diverse hat on. I know I read a study that was done by Harvard Business Review, and that study was talking about how female founders are questioned in the deal room by venture capital partners. And the questions that were going to the females were very much, have you done this? What is your background? What is your experience? It was very much, prove you've done this before we put the money into you. These questions were really happening. They just didn't know that's exactly how they're being questioned. But then in contrast, when the male founders were being questioned, we were seeing that they were going, well, what are you capable of doing? What can you do? There was less about prove what you've done in the past and more about, can we believe that you can execute on this? So until we think about how we take them through the boardroom and through the deal room as investors and how we question, that is, some sort of inherent systemic bias that we really need to think about. So I think the fourth point around understanding, monitoring, and taking action to promote other aspects of diversity in EIC supported projects, companies, investments, we really recommended that strongly. It has to go through all of EIC, as well as with investors, as well as with LPs. Fundamentally, the entire system really needs to change and shift in order to really focus on D&I. And then actually, I think the purpose of today was to collect, harmonize, and share diversity data across the innovation ecosystem. There's lots of data everywhere, but are we gathering it in one place? In different countries, there's different regulations and laws about what you can track and what you can't track. And that was a really interesting finding. In the UK, although we're no longer EU, we are part of the European continent and continue to remain a very large player in the space. How are we allowed to track diversity data versus other countries, UK, Germany, Nordics, etc.? And I think that's really great that we're gathering today to think about that. You can see the link in the footer below, and I'm sure if Elena maybe could share this in the chat, the link to our statement that we published a year ago. I stepped off the EIC board at the end of last year, and I continue to remain an EIC ambassador. And Keith, I'm going to pass over to you to talk to the last two slides, because you're going to let us know what's happened since we published a statement at the end of June last year. So with that, Keith, I'm going to pass over to you. And next slide, please.
Many thanks, Bindi, and thanks for all your championship and support and ideas that we've really tried to integrate. So we've managed to follow up in the last year on, I'd say, about half of these recommendations. So in the EIC work program now, we do look at the gender of the work package leaders. And this was an entirely new approach in the framework program to look at this really kind of formative stage of research careers of actually leading one of the main packages of the research grants under the Pathfinder. We have also, for the first time, changed our definition of women-led. So we are recognizing, and when you apply for the EIC Accelerator, we will ask for information about the gender, not only of the CEO, but also the CTO, CSO, and in terms of the prioritization for the interviews, we will take that into account. So one of the interesting things when we make these changes, we get data. So this time, for the first time, we will actually have data on what is going on beyond the CEO position in the companies. We've also, in our new transition funding, which is the bridge between the research phase and the company startup scale-up phase, we have also put in the prioritization for either women-led companies or women-led projects. And on the kind of big recommendation for the transformative change, we've been doing a lot of work. Commissioner Gabrielle has been pushing this very much. In particular, we had an important workshop back in November, which was organized together with the EIF, with the EIB, looking at the recommendations from the board, but also from the Women in VC group to see what we could do. And then today, we're really tackling the issue, and you'll hear more about it in a minute, of the lack of evidence base here, that we have lots of partial evidence, but we can't really track over time. We think some things are getting better, some things are getting worse, but we really need the evidence base behind it also to know how effective our actions are. So if I take the next slide. We have not, and we'll come on to this, we don't have a sort of institutional definition of diversity. This is something that we're looking to build in the report, in the new project that we will be financing. But just to give you a bit of a flavor, I mean, this was one of the reports we came across, this one from McKinsey, which looks at lots of different aspects of diversity. Including, and this distinction was between those aspects which are really part of a person's, what they are born with, which others which are more about their what they have picked up over their life, if you like, the nature versus nurture debate. So it will be very interesting for us to see how we can tackle this at European level. And we're very interested to go beyond the gender issue, but we know there's difficulties there, and we hope this project will really help with this. So I'll sort of finish here for the moment. I'll come back with some more details about the project, but let me just say that the motto of the European Union is united in diversity. So we really have a basis right from the beginning of the European Treaty that diversity is our strength, and we need to recognize it, see where it is, and see how we're doing with it. So I pass back to you, Eleanor.
Thank you. Thanks, Keith, and thanks a lot, Bindi. It's always great to hear your real experience in the sector. So in the agenda, we had inserted a little intermezzo, but I think we will go straight to Amy now, just to get back on track in the agenda, and then we might have our little Slido intermezzo later. So Amy, over to you.
Thanks. Do you still want to do your little quiz?
Well, we'll do it after your intervention, because Irene actually gave out the answers.
Okay, perfect.
That's not the reason. It's just to get back on track. So we'll do that before the Q&A.
Perfect. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm Amy. I'm editor at Sifted. We are a publication reporting on startups and tech in Europe. We've been going for about 3 years now, and we've got reporters all over the continent. And right from the start, Sifted, representing the real diversity that exists in European tech was something that we set out to do, and we're definitely not perfect, but we often get feedback from our readers that they find that the diversity of people we speak to is a pleasant change from some of the other tech publications out there. So I'm here to talk about the state of diversity in European tech. I've stolen a lot from Atomico's State of European Tech report and from some reporting that Sifted has done. So thank you, Atomico, for doing lots of homework for me. So Europe's tech ecosystem has a very visible challenge, which is this. I've picked on EU startups. I could have picked on many other publications, including Sifted on some days, but it's just a lot of men. A lot of men, and often white men, and often men who've been to similar universities and had very similar, upbringings. When we look at the funding, 90.1% of funding raised by European startups in 2021 was raised by male founder teams. That is absolutely outrageous. That's basically all of it is raised by all male teams. Mixed founder teams got 8.8% of funding in 2021, while all female founder teams raised just 1.1% of funding. 1.1% in 2021. And what's even worse is that this isn't changing. You can look over the past 5 years and it's basically level. It's not getting any better, despite the fact that we have so many more initiatives around to kind of support female founders. There's so much more attention on it. There are networks, all of these things. It's just not changing. And it actually went down by 1.1% last year. This is awful. Then we need to also look beyond gender, and often nobody does look beyond gender, but the picture gets even worse when we look at some of those other aspects of diversity that we were looking at in the previous presentation. So almost all founders who raise VC funding in Europe are white. Another graph here from the Atomico State of European Tech report, just 1.8 billion was raised by startups with founders from all, just ethnic minorities, in comparison to 103.9 billion that was raised by startups with all white founding teams in 2021. There's something going wrong here. If we look at the UK, and we'll talk a bit about collecting data in a second, but in the UK between 2009 and 2019, just 0.24% of venture capital raised went to teams of Black entrepreneurs. And this is according to a report that was published by a firm called Extend Ventures in 2020. And in that time, that means literally 38 Black founded businesses raised money in a whole decade, which is really not very much in a country where, in London in particular, where most startups, the biggest percentage of startups are based, there's a significant Black population, and yet barely any money is going to businesses started by that community. And this is a slide to remind us all, as we've already spoken about, that ethnicity and gender aren't the only forms of diversity out there. There's also disability, there's socioeconomic background, there's religion, there's sexuality, there's social mobility, and so many other factors to consider as well. And the kind of conundrum we have, and this is something that we face as journalists regularly, is that it's very hard to get hold of any data on this. The amount of times I've been, wondering, what is the percentage of women who work in tech in the UK? You give it a good Google, you can't find it. I send out a tweet, I tag all the VCs and founders and people who I think might have this data, and it just doesn't exist. There are so many of these instances where, it's just not out there. I remember tweeting, I think it was last year, how many female partners are there at venture capital funds in Europe, and I was convinced that this must exist somewhere, and it didn't. So Sifted created that data set, but there's just lots and lots of examples where this data is not being connected. Now, often when that comes to ethnicity, that is because in some countries it's illegal, or people perceive it to be illegal or hard or difficult in some way to collect that data. In the UK, it's very typical to be asked to put down, you know, the ethnicity that you identify as on all sorts of forms and things you fill out, but that's not the case, as I'm sure many of you know, in other parts of the world. There's also a challenge around definitions. So in Germany and in France, it's more common, I've been told, I don't live there, I've never lived there, to collect data on people with migrant backgrounds, which is clearly not exactly the same thing as ethnicity. And that makes comparing what's going on, comparing the picture on which kinds of businesses are raising money across Europe really tricky, which is why I think the idea of this, this index and this data that you're planning on collecting and having a kind of much clearer definition across the whole of Europe makes a lot more sense. There's also the challenge that often, because people feel like they cannot ask people about things such as their ethnicity, other people are prescribing an identity to someone else. So they're looking on LinkedIn or whatever, and they're saying this person is a white woman, and that might not necessarily be how that person perceives themselves. And then there's another whole layer we can go into, which is leadership. The people who run startups are not just the founders of those startups. You touched on this a bit earlier when you were talking about women in leadership positions. And we also have a massive diversity problem at the leadership level. So a Sifted article that came out earlier this year looked at just as an example, a flavour, this exists across lots of sectors. We looked at the percentage of women who held top positions at Europe's most prominent neobanks. And I think this is quite emblematic because these businesses have attracted billions in VC funding. You know, Europe's good at producing neobanks. And this is what we found, that in the top management positions, so, you know, CTOs, CROs, CIOs, etc., only 28% of those positions were held by women at the 17 neobanks that we spoke to. So that included businesses like N26 and Starling and Monzo and Revolut. And it was basically the same, if slightly less percentage on the board of directors. And that is just as bad as the legacy banks, the high street banks across Europe that they are trying to replace. They are equally kind of behind in terms of the gender diversity of their board. So these disruptive businesses who are coming along to do things differently and better are actually failing at doing that in this way. We can also look at, I mean, I've put here tech talent, but we could look at lots of other kinds of talent that startups need. But we really lack diversity in engineering teams. So sorry, this is a little bit small, but this shows that basically no country has more than about 30% of the tech talent being made up of women. Most countries, it's between 70 and 80% of people who work in the tech industry, you know, who are engineers, are men. And you know, that's pretty consistent across Europe. And why does this matter? I'm sure you all know this already, but let's just reiterate the point. Tech is in and of itself, it's not good or bad, it's neutral, but it's shaped by the people who design it and make it and run the companies that produce it. And if we don't have a diversity of perspectives and voices creating startups, then we're not going to build the best businesses that we could. I'm sure many of you have read Caroline Criado Perez's book, Invisible Women, that has a gazillion great examples about how if you don't have diverse people creating products, then you create a lot of products that are not really any good for the people that make up 51% of the world, women. And I guess for lots of you who work for the EU and work in the Commission, that if you care about the citizens that you represent, and all of them, not just the most vocal or the most powerful of them, then we need to make sure that the startups who are creating Europe's next generation of Googles and Ubers and Airbnbs and WeWorks are making products that are designed for everyone. Then, of course, again, as people have already said today, diverse teams make better business decisions. This also matters for our economy. here's a quote from the Harvard Business Review that, you know, basically found that of public companies, those that had more ethnically diverse management teams were more likely to have better financial returns. Same thing for those who had better gender diversity. And then I think there's two other reasons why this matters. It helps companies not look stupid. So this is just an example I pulled yesterday. Samsung getting in trouble for you know, having an advert that showed a woman running in the middle of the night. You know, if a woman had been involved in that campaign, she might have pointed out that a woman is probably not going to go running in the city in the middle of night because that would probably be quite dangerous for her. So it makes Samsung look a bit stupid. Classic example that when Apple launched its health app, it could track steps and blood alcohol content, but it forgot that women have periods, so couldn't help you track that. Quite key part of your health. And another example I've thrown in, the Belgian and Dutch e-bike companies, VanMoof and Cowboy. I remember interviewing them a few years ago when they launched, and they gave me a test ride on their bike, and I couldn't ride it because I'm a woman, and they had made the frame far too big for women, and that because they were primarily targeting men, at least at first, with their bike. And then finally, it matters because the page, the homepage I showed at the start, doesn't inspire someone like me to start a company, because I look at that and I think this is a business environment that doesn't look like I fit in. And what we try to do at Sifted, and we don't always get there, but this is what we'd much rather see, is homepages that look like this, and, you know, young Black women raising money next to, you know, some male co-founders. You know, we've got a whole range of different people in different companies here, and that is what we would like to see. Some recommendations. These are actually from a woman called Dharma, who works at Bethnal Green Ventures, who helped me with this presentation. A shared taxonomy, which I believe is what you're looking into doing anyway, so that we know what's what and what we're, you know, we're comparing apples to apples when we're talking about this across countries. Regulation to promote more accountability to report on this data, and analysis of data with a lens on intersectionality, so thinking of the different categories that people might fall into, that goes beyond just gender and ethnicity. So that was me. There's my email. There's Sifted's website address, and yeah, thank you to Dharma, Johannes, Anissa, Eleanor, and Nora, who all helped me pull together some of these statistics. And I think that's me right on time.
Right on time, Amy. Well done. Thank you very much. And yeah, thanks for this wonderful content. I think it resonates with lots of us. I also graduated in engineering. I recognize those numbers. So so now I think that we are going to move to the next session on describing the action that we're launching today. And this session will be split into two parts. In the first one, we will have the EIB. We have Dara Nikolova with us, finance advisor in the European Investment Bank, who will tell us about the work that is ongoing in the EIB. And that is very relevant, because we expect that the winners of this call that we're launching today will also work in close collaboration with the EIB. And then Keith Sequeira, head of the EIC Board and Strategy Unit in the EIC, will present the specific details of the call. So we'll start with Dara. Thank you very much for being with us. Over to you.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you all for attending as well. Really, it's been so far for me also been really great to hear what's already been said, and hopefully I can give you a little sense as well of what we at the European Investment Bank have been doing on the topic of gender. And I will start with just saying, so my team, the Innovation Finance Advisory Team, one of the things that we do is we look at the broader market in Europe to find these gaps in access to finance, where there can be a specific intervention, whether it is from what we do or on a broader EU level, to address these structural, let's say, gaps. One of the studies that we did, and this was back in 2020, it feels like forever ago, and I really I was very happy to see some of the fresher data that has come out since then. Unfortunately, there's not in some cases much difference. So this study, we looked at women entrepreneurs, and without reiterating why it's important, I think it's been covered exceptionally well so far. This is already in 2019 when we started this, we were looking at, this has to, this makes economic sense. This is part of the fabric of the EU values, and we as the EU bank need to do something to first understand the problem and then make recommendations how to address it. So at the time, we found that, as been said, 30% of funding goes to female-led companies, 2%. Yes, back that time, it was 2% of VC funding went to female-led companies, and which already sets the stage. There is a problem. There is a gap in how women are able to access capital. The other thing that we looked at was ownership and female ownership of these innovative companies. Actually, we looked at a slightly bigger universe, so we were also looking in the later stages, Series C and above as well. And we found that 35% of equity holders were women, but they held only 20% of the equity, which was one aspect that we didn't dig deeper into, but it's something that that is also a problem, because when women hold less equity from the beginning, then they also are sharing less into the upside once these companies get big and successful, and this has effects on women's wealth and women's ability to then become serial entrepreneurs or to become angel investors and support the next generation of female founders. And the last thing was that there is an over reliance on government or let's say public funds or public initiatives that are focusing on supporting female founders, but that the private sector is a little bit behind. One of the essentially the insights that we got is that there are hurdles and biases that female founders face, and some of them are quantifiable, and because they're quantifiable, we can track their progress and we can try and find ways to improve them. One particular one, which Bindi was speaking to as well, is how many women investors are there. Some studies say that female investors are up to 3 times more likely to fund women CEOs, but then they only represent about 10% of VC partners. So this was one leverage point, let's say, where we could have, we could track the progress, we could make sure to educate the investors about why it's important to invest in women, but also to make sure that women get the opportunity to be making those decisions. Another point is sector bias. Again, when we heard about the discrepancy in the technical or like the engineering fields, there's an assumption that female founders they will do great in consumer, retail, these types of let's say traditionally feminine businesses, but they might face an uphill battle when we're talking about securing funding for a deep tech company, and this is where the work of the EIC is shown that paying attention to this can yield results. And then the last, let's say the last 2 points are a bit connected. It's about funding it beyond the initial stages where it might be. So at which point are you able to really get growth capital? Not just how many startups are getting funded, but how much funding are they getting? Are they getting access to funding in that critical stage after seed Series A, when it's really about scaling up? So some of the data, it's again small, and it's not really about it's really about we need to measure progress, and these are some of the dimensions where we can see we can check, we can test whether what we're doing to fix the problem is actually fixing the problem. One obvious example, what is the share of women-led companies, and how is it progressing over time? Again, we need a consistent definition about what does a women-led company mean in order to be able to track this. We also need to break this down by sector, by funding stage, to identify if there are particular pockets where it is exceptionally difficult for women to raise money. And we also need to build the evidence base about what was said, that it is smart business. The performance of women-led companies, on average, so far, is proving to be better, and they're getting higher revenues, they're more profitable. Maybe that's inspiring more investors to put gender smart investment strategies in place. It's really about understanding what are the important trends that are going to create the momentum on which we can build. And then the next point, which is really, we wanted to look at it on a broad ecosystem level, because we noticed that there were a certain subset of countries, 5 countries specifically, that accounted for the majority of Series C funding that went to women-led companies. And they tended to have some similarities in terms of how strong the cultural sensitivity and the public policies were to promote gender equality. They were very conscious about the corporate governance and making sure that women are represented on boards of companies, and that there was, in the UK, for example, there are explicit requirements and quotas about there has to be women on the board, and so on. So there are additional metrics that can give us an indication about the overall ecosystem health, which then can help us find what are the conditions on the ground that are encouraging more women and making it easier for women to find funding. And that brought us to a set of recommendations. Some of these already we see that are being put in place and that are hopefully starting to bear fruit. One of these was to put gender metrics and KPIs and to start tracking what we are doing and how we're performing. So this really is the purpose of this workshop, and so it is really important and really excited to see what the end result will be here, because we do need good data so that we can design the best evidence-based solutions in order to tackle this really complex and interconnected and just ecosystem-wide problem. So that is it from me, and yeah, look forward to hearing if there's any questions, and I'll pass it on, Elena.
Hi, thank you, Dara. Actually, I had a question. I put it in the chat. I'm going to ask you. You showed there was a clear peak in 2015 in the data that you showed. Would we have any lessons learned on why it went so well and that we could replicate, or do we know?
2015, yeah. Let me. We didn't. I'd have to double check exactly what happened in 2015.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you mean the?
Maybe we did something really well. I think it was, I couldn't read the small print, but it was,
yes, it was the number
of founders, I think, that
the
we
number
have.
of companies. Yeah, I mean, the one of the things that was in this particular case, where we're seeing a lot of increase in angel and seed funding. So this is, I mean, if I'm looking at the chart, the rest was staying about the same or maybe a little bit bigger. So yeah, that is a good question. We didn't dig into it, but perhaps it's there was something that.
And there's another question for you, Dara, in the chat.
Yes.
It came from Slido, but it's been reported here. So we have opened the chat as well for questions if you'd like to submit them. And it's, what is the data source for the data you presented?
Excellent question. We were using, so it was part based on interview, and it was data from PitchBook. So the basis of the data is from PitchBook, and then in some cases there were interviews to trying to get more of this qualitative insights and to get.
Okay.
And our definition for female founder also included board members. So it was much broader than just the CEO or the founder or even the executive team. So it would also include if the board had women on it.
Thank you. So if there are no other immediate questions, I'm going to give the floor to Keith to present the action, the gender index action, and then we will take more questions in the general Q&A. Over to you, Keith.
Many thanks, Eleanor, and thanks also, Amy. I mean, it's really, really interesting data. So let me start the slides. Let me see if I can get this to work. Sorry, give me 1 second.
It's okay. If not, I think Pedro has them too.
Yeah, I don't seem to have access to share slides. Let me try another.
Perhaps Pedro, if you can, in the back office.
I think maybe I can do it now.
Yeah, I just made you a presenter. If needed, I
Okay.
can make you also a co-host. But you should be able to share.
Okay. There does seem to be a problem still. No, I think I have it now. I have it now. Very good. Let me check if the slides are now appearing for you.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Apologies for that. So you've heard a lot of the context, and what I think has come across pretty strongly is that we kind of lack a rigorous, robust, comparable across countries, across time, evidence base of what's going on. So this was very much the inspiration taken from the work so far to put in the work plan for the European Innovation Council this year, this action to create a pilot gender and diversity innovation index. And what we've set as the objectives here is firstly to look at where are the gaps. We need to look at the definitional questions that have been discussed. What are the relevant measures? And how can we use this data to assess progress? What this should help us with is better informed decisions. We've seen elsewhere, if I can give the example in the scientific world, we have the SHE figures, which the European Commission produces, which is comprehensive data, gender data in the scientific system. And it's been incredibly important for us at European level, but also across all the different member states to have this data for looking at policies and monitoring their impact. And then it's also about communication. And if you have the numbers and the data, and I think from Sifted, this was very clear as well, we can really communicate about it and see what's going on. So what we've put in the work program is what we call a coordination support action with a budget of up to €700,000. Now, just to be clear, this is not a tender for a procurement. This is a grant. So for those of you who are interested in applying, and we hope many of you will, this is giving you freedom to see how you think you can best meet the objectives, and you will be assessed against the criteria which you will see later on. So this is not a detailed specification of what we need, because this is really giving the ownership to you to come up with the best proposals about how to do it. And what we will fund here is a single project, and we would at least like this project to produce a first edition of a gender and innovation index, as well as recommendations about how we can go forward and make this a more permanent. And as you've, I think, understood now, we are working in very close partnership with the European Investment Bank, and we have a sister action that will be supporting the EIB to do work in this area as well. So the scope of what we will fund is to identify where are the sources of the reliable information, what is the best information available that we have, and if there are gaps, to also, and this is why we've foreseen a quite substantial budget, we think there's going to be gaps that will require data collection as well. As I mentioned, the target is to produce a first version of this index. which can use the data, it can use third-party data, recommendations about how we can go forward, how we can get consistent data collection, are there things needed on reporting standards, and we think this is very important to really communicate and to disseminate very widely about what is going on in the innovation ecosystem. You'll see here that clearly, and it's been discussed so far, gender is a very sort of clear element here, but we really want this project that we will fund to look at other dimensions of diversity. We have not given a definition of this, but we do expect ideas, proposals about how to do this in a way that overcomes some of the barriers that you've heard about cross-country comparisons and different definitions and systems in different countries. So who can apply for this? This can be a single organization, it can be a consortia, this is entirely open. It can be any type of legal entity, it can be consultancies, it can be universities, research institutes, it can be associations. It is very open in terms of what type of status the organization or organizations that put in proposals. There are geographical limitations for the grants. They come from Horizon Europe. So the organizations do need to come from a member state or one of the many associated countries. We can look at proposals from countries that are still in the process of association, but we need those association agreements to be able to fund them. And there's also ways of having additional partners to be involved in this, what we call affiliated entities, that can be from other countries as well. So just to be clear, again, these types of actions do not fund kind of technological development. So we will not be funding the development of new IT systems or algorithms. But what we will fund is all of the costs of the data collection, the analysis, the putting together of the index, the dissemination, the networking, the bringing in advice, such that we've got the strongest possible, both the index and the view about how we should go forward. It's also very important that we have put in place a kind of governance structure for this. We have in mind a advisory group, and we ask applicants to bring forward their ideas of the relevant people to be included on this advisory group, and we will match that with people from the Commission side, from the EIB, from the EIF, from the agency. And this is a way of overlooking the work, but also joining up between this action and the work of the EIB and indeed others. So as I mentioned, we indicate a maximum budget here, which is what we have assessed to be the right amount. It is possible to request different amounts, but if you want to request something above 700,000, it will need a clear justification. We haven't specified a time frame, so again, this is for you as applicants to say how long you think this project is needed to deliver what is required from it. And what we do here is that we reimburse completely at 100% all of the costs that are directly incurred in implementing the project. And we also have a kind of flat rate, a lump sum of 25%, which is there to cover all of the costs that cannot be directly bookable to the project itself. So we've actually opened the call already. And it is open for applications until the 8th of September. The applications go through the Horizon, in fact, the Commission's funders and tenders portal. You have there is a call identifier, but you should very easily be able to find it by just putting in the keyword search. There is a set application form where we'll need certain administrative information, which is what we call the Part A, but also then the proposal about how you will implement this, which is a more free form, and this is what we call the Part B. And you'll find all the templates there and the information about how to do this. There is support if you're an organization that are looking for partners. There's a partner search. We have agreements with the Enterprise Europe network to help find partners, and we also have a network in every single member state of a national contact point specifically for the European Innovation Council, whose job it is to help with any questions, and they will pass on questions to us in case they cannot answer them directly themselves. So once the applications come in for this deadline, we will organise an evaluation. There are no secrets in this evaluation. The evaluators will look at all of the proposals against the criteria that are set out. I will come to these. And we will look at there will be a scoring against the criteria, and the strongest proposal will be the one that is put forward for the funding of the project. And we hope to be able to take this decision during the autumn so that the project can start as early as possible in 2023. You will see in the work programme text the evaluation criteria, and this is really about the quality of the proposal. We're looking at the impact that the proposal can have, and we're looking at the organisation of the work, particularly if there's a consortia, that there's clarity about who is doing what, how this will be managed, and how this will all fit together. For those of you who are familiar with Horizon, this will be fairly standard, but it's also, I hope, very accessible for any organisation that has not been involved in the Horizon programme before. So we'll circulate, I think, the presentations after this to everybody, and you have there as well the links for the work programme, which has all the information about the scope and the objectives and the criteria, and then also the links to the funding portal, which is where you actually make the applications. And there you'll see also that we have an email address if you want to follow up with any questions that we can't deal with today. So many thanks, and I'll pass back to you, Eleanor.
Thank you, Keith, and thanks to our participants who have started to submit some questions. And I think there is one that you can answer, Keith or Bindi, and it's a question about why was there no representative of the EIC board diversity group from Turkey or from another, I suppose, third country that could have helped indeed with this diversity and the communication across cultures. I see Bindi has turned her video on. Do you want to take that one on, Bindi?
I think Keith is better positioned to take this one. I don't mean to pass the ball, but
No, that's fine. So the EIC board, we have 20 members. They are selected from right across Europe, but not only Europe. So we do have members of the board from outside Europe. And the idea of this is really to have the group itself needs to be diverse. So we have a whole diversity in terms of geographical backgrounds, in terms of roles in the innovation ecosystem, from researchers to innovators to investors to ecosystem builders. We have some very young members of the group. We have some more senior age. So we've looked really at age diversity. And then when we, in the pilot board where Bindi was a member, we looked for volunteers of people who were interested in this working group. And as Bindi said, there was a lot of interest. So we have used the people on our board. But the point of having workshops like this is really to, and we have had a number, is to really broaden out the discussion, to test some of the ideas that are coming from our board members. So this is just a bit of background about how it works and how it works for the EIC board, which is very much the group that advises the Commission and the agency on the strategy for the EIC and what we should be looking at. And, which is why we're looking at this. This was direct advice that came from the board.
Thanks, Keith. The same participant had a question on the eligibility of Turkey to participate, and we already replied in the chat that Turkey is eligible because it is an associated country in Horizon Europe, like many others, as you will have seen in the link. So we don't mention them all, but there is a number of them. So Turkey is an eligible country. Then there is a more generic question. I think it's a reaction to Dara's presentation. It's about what do you think are the pros and cons of collecting data through forms sent out to funders and investors? Asking more, then there is a sentence I don't understand, asking more in terms of relevance and reliability. I don't know if we can open the microphone. I don't think so, Maya, right? But maybe Dara, what do you think about, what would you make out of this question?
So one of the in general, the EIB, also our economics research department, does rely on surveys and these questionnaires that they get the direct feedback from companies. So I think that there is absolutely room for that. Obviously, like with the problem with any survey is to make sure that the sample is representative, and that the people who are replying and the data that you are collecting is it really gives you a sense of what is out there in the ecosystem. And maybe as an aside, one interesting thing for me personally is also understanding the people who are excluded from the numbers, in the sense of the women who, let's say, have closed down their startups or who have not completed a funding round, and these let's say missing pieces. I think this is where service can be particularly powerful. So yeah, I'm not sure I can. If that was a technical question on the full statistical backing of it, I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer, unfortunately.
Okay, no, thank you, Dara. Then the rest of the questions are more technical questions for the call itself, and one that we expected: are researchers from UK-based institutions eligible to apply? Do you want to take that one, Keith, or I take that one?
I'll take it. I mean, I have to be a bit careful here. So we are hoping that the UK will associate to Horizon Europe. I mean, this is foreseen in the agreement between the EU and the UK, but it has not been put into place yet because of various other problems. So the situation is that applicants from the UK may apply. We will evaluate those applications, but to be able to fund participants from the UK, we will need the association agreement in place. I know the UK government has some separate arrangements that they can fund participants as well. If not, then the UK organisations can take part in a consortia, but you need to make sure that you have eligible partners. You can't come just by yourself. You will need partners in other European countries who are member states or associated countries. And we will not be able to fund the UK participants if there's not an association agreement in place. So certainly, yes, you can apply. I think probably it's wisest to apply together with other organisations who are eligible organisations. But you need to be aware that there is a risk there and some uncertainty, because we don't know when this association agreement will be in place. There's also other ways to participate as something we call an affiliated entity, where you're essentially a kind of subcontractor to one of the other organisations. But again, we will not be able to fund unless the association agreement is in place. I don't know if I got that right, Eleanor, or whether...
That's fully correct. Then an easy, quick one. Can a private consultant participate in the call? Yes, actually.
Absolutely. There's no restrictions on type of legal entity, profit, non-profit. I mean, this is open to. I don't think we can have natural persons as individuals, but any legal entity of any form can apply.
Great, thanks. Then a question from the ERC PE10. It's directed to Bindi, but I think perhaps Keith and maybe Dara as well, you are more suitable to answer. It's about the collection of data, the collection of diversity data, which is it seems very ambitious because a lot of countries do not collect such data. So the first question is, how will we collect such data? And then how will we compare it to a baseline? So I don't know who wants to take this one. Dara, are you still there? I think I can start perhaps on this one. Well, the collection will be carried out by trying to find the data that have been we've seen, for example, from the Sifted presentation from Amy, that there is some data that is already being collected. This is being collected well beyond gender. So the idea is to work and find, first of all these sources of data and try to harmonize them, bring them together, and then compare them with the taxonomy that we will also have to decide in collaboration with the EIB and try to propose an activity of this kind. Then, of course, there will be data gaps, which is clearly mentioned in the action, and this we will identify indeed. And in terms of baseline, well, we will have to see. That's a very good question. There are baselines that come either sometimes from other countries, for example, from ethnicity. There are much better baselines done in the United States than is done in Europe. And this will be part, in any case, of the recommendations that the report will issue. So this is just to start somewhere. I don't know, Dara, if you want to add something. And yes.
I would just wanted to add one thing, but I'll pass to Dara. I mean, this is, I think, really what we're asking the project to do. I mean, if we had the answers, we wouldn't be funding this piece of work. And I mean, we know in lots of other fields, and I've been, I was involved in the European Innovation Scoreboard previously, where we had lots of these issues. So this is really why we're funding this project, to propose, you know, answers to this, and then we will fund the work to actually to do the work. But I mean, this is the questions that we're putting for the project to come with proposals which we'll fund to solve. So we, at least from our side, I mean, there's not a simple answer to this, and we'll be looking for the best methodologies, realizing that there's always going to be limitations, but we expect the consortia or the organization to have competencies about how to conduct surveys, how to address some of these statistical issues, what are the best sources, how to collect data in a rigorous way when there's new data collection. I mean, these are all the kinds of things that we really want the project to do.
Thanks, Keith. The next question is a follow-up to this one, and is if we have a lawyer or if we will receive legal advice, I suppose, on what is legal in countries like France and Germany in terms of reporting on ethnicity and other diversity elements, I suppose. Well, again, I think this is exactly like the answer we gave before. This will be part of the scope of the consortium or entity that will win to make an analysis of what is legal in the different countries to report. In general, however, when it comes to us as entities and we ask for these data, the most important thing is that it's not mandatory. As long as if the data is requested and is optional, it is something that is perfectly legal as long as people can opt out. So when in defining gaps, then we will be providing recommendations that people don't have to follow, but yeah, so the analysis of the legality will be just embedded in the work of the consortium. Another question from Slido. The underrepresentation of women as founders starts already at university level. Did speakers have access to these data, for example, university spin-offs? I don't think Amy was mentioning data at university level. The EIB wouldn't look at this. We in the EIC, we do collect data on the applicants in our early stage innovative programs, such as the Pathfinder and in part the transition. We don't know directly how many are university spin-offs, and then we do know the data about the researchers themselves, and the data are absolutely consistent indeed with what we see in companies. We have again around 14 to 20%, depending on the sector, of women researchers in leadership positions, and this is perfectly consistent with what we see then translating into entrepreneurship. So that is true. How will we be receiving the slides? We will post the slides and the recording of this video online in the webpage that we have created for this event. So you will all have access to this information and we will disseminate it further. I don't see any other questions. If you raise your hand, I think we can unmute your microphone if anybody still feels like asking a question with their voice. I don't hear anything, so unless our speakers and our panel wants to add anything, I think we can just thank you everybody thanks the panelists very much for their participation, thanks for the questions, and we hope to receive a lot of applications and to see soon the results of this activity. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thanks. Big thanks to